Well, China is France's third largest trade partner behind the European Union and the United States. In the first quarter of this year, China's exports to France hit a record high of more than $19 billion. That's up nearly 3% year on year. There was a huge jump in electrical exports, up more than 37.5% compared to the same period a year earlier. And imports from France also increased, up 16.4% to nearly $9 billion, with aircraft imports surging 183%. Well, let's talk to Rana, director of the University of Oxford's China Centre. Rana, welcome back to the programme. Good to see you. How significant is this for both countries?
I think it is significant. Essentially, France is one of the major European powers that the Chinese government has been trying to pull into a more friendly relationship in the last few months. That's partly because it regards France, along with Germany and some of the other major European actors, as important partners for economic purposes, but also because China hopes that it may be able to persuade them on a slightly different path than that of the United States when it comes to geopolitics.
How does this platform contribute to strengthening overall diplomatic and economic ties between China and France?
This is very much a macro platform. In other sense, I think it's where the leaders are going to discuss the big picture. The granularity of whether a particular trade deal or tariff reduction will be done in other places, and probably it will be rather more painstaking. But the wider idea that in particular in areas of science and technology, there may be cooperation between France and China, I think is the overall message that's being sent by this particular meeting. And that, of course, sits in contrast with some of the other powers, again, particularly the United States, which is not looking for technological collaboration with China at the moment.
I was going to ask you, how will this be viewed by other countries?
I think it'll be varied. Some countries, such as the United Kingdom, have also taken a line that there is a need for a reduction in terms of some of the relationships with China when it comes to technical matters. France hasn't exactly taken an opposite view, but it's certainly taken a view that suggests that there are some areas, for instance, in 5G technology, where it's more willing to hear the Chinese argument than, say, the US and the UK. So you might consider it a variation rather than something completely different. But then what we know from past history is that France has quite a long history of having a quite distinctive foreign policy.
You call it distinctive. Is there a tension between a France-China strategy that is markedly different from an EU-China strategy?
I think the main thing is that France always has to make sure that its own quite individualistic version of foreign policy is nonetheless coordinated with Germany within the EU. And Germany, of course, has significant trade relationships with China. I think it would be a mistake to think of France as opposed to the EU policy, rather that France and Germany together have a very, very important influence on it. That's particularly true since the departure of the UK from the EU, which no longer acts as a force that adds a slightly different, perhaps slightly more pro-Washington element to that mix.
With all of the global economic challenges and uncertainties, what are these specific overarching issues in the economic and financial realm that you think will be the focus of this dialogue with Beijing?
I think that France will be concerned, first of all, to make sure that things like international financial norms allow French banks and finance companies to have a role in the Chinese market. As well as that, I think France has an interest, as all Western countries do, in making sure the Asia-Pacific is a fairly calm and stable region. China will want to make sure that it can carry out the rather difficult balancing act of trying to securitize and in some ways close down aspects of its international markets, particularly to do with finance, at the same time as not alienating powers like France, which it obviously needs on board in terms of creating some sorts of international partnerships. So it's a delicate balancing act for both actors.
Rana, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed for coming on the programme. Rana, Director of the University of Oxford's China Centre.